Thanks, Jim. Hi, thanks too for coming from me. This is a deck that starts with my resume in sort of logo form. I'll say first of all that because I'm an idiot, I didn't go to Netscape when I could have in 1994. I went in 1995. I had some loyalty to the startup I was at before Netscape, which you've never heard of. So I spent another year there. But when I went in 95, I did JavaScript in a big hurry, as is well known, and it was supposed to be the sidekick language to Java, but it ended up sort of becoming the dominant language on not only the browser side, but I think by a lot of measures around the world, on Stack Overflow, on GitHub, even some of the enterprise programming language top 10s have JavaScript near the top, if not at the top. And because I was doing it at Netscape, which was being crushed by Microsoft, after I took it to standardization, I joined a few folks like Jamie Zawinski in founding Mozilla in 1998. And that was meant to be an open source commercial experiment. It was the first real code base taken from industry that was closed source, released to open source, which required sort of going through the code and looking for places, mostly where Jamie was involved, that had bad words in them in the comments and taking them out. But it was a success, I think, both in the long run and as a follow-on to things like Linux and Apache that were already showing open source could work. And it was coming out of a history from the GNU project where people weren't sure if open source was really reproducible. It did not save Netscape. Netscape was going down under Microsoft's convicted abuse of its monopoly, but it ended up spawning Firefox because we knew once Microsoft, true to sort of textbook economics form, had stopped working on Internet Explorer. They'd taken it down to a skeleton crew. We knew there'd be an opportunity based on users really wanting a better browser. So we built that with Firefox, restarted the browser market, restarted web standards. 2004 was important because Firefox 1 was in November, but even before that, after W3C, the Web Consortium Standards meeting, where they were preoccupied with XML and they were going to replace the web with something better, which was not plausible. Friends at Mozilla, Apple, and Opera convened and we decided to do HTML5, which did happen, became the standard. It's now all around us on the web. So Firefox was important for getting the web going again. We started JavaScript standardization in 2005. I put Bitcoin up there. I didn't invest. Again, I'm not about the money. I did have a speaker at Mozilla in 2011, I think, talk about it. And I started looking at things more seriously around 2015. That's when I met the Ethereum London folks, because I was interested in not just doing what became Brave, but also doing some kind of a blockchain-based cryptocurrency that could reward users without them having to even buy into it. It would be like a social credit currency. It would give everyone some coin to get started and perhaps on an ongoing basis. But I realized Ethereum was too young. That was just after, it was July 2015. I think Ethereum Genesis block auction was the fall of 2014. It was before the DAO attack. I met Stefan Twall in the London offices. He gave me some code. I think he gave me some Solidity code. I set it aside. I did Brave with co-founder and other key first four people. We came out in January 2016, and the DAO attack happened in the summer, I think, or spring. And then I looked at the code Stefan gave me and it had the same vulnerability. So I'm glad I didn't use it. I had to put first things first. Had to build a browser that could theoretically take Chrome on by using the Chromium engine, but blocking all the tracking and ads and fingerprinting that Google, I think, cannot block by nature of its business. And after that, of course, in the prototype with Bitcoin, we did the basic attention token sale in 2017. That's the final logo, the triangle. And it represents the three sides of the sort of ecosystem that funds the visible web. Users, creators, not just publishers of note, but individuals on YouTube and Twitch and elsewhere. And advertisers, you can't count on advertisers. We'd like it if everybody paid for the web that they use, but some people are not as well off, they cannot. Some people aren't sure if they should pay. How much can you afford to pay through a paywall that's charging you for an annual subscription when you're only going to read a few articles? You don't want to take on the credit card risk, you don't want to cross-subsidize articles you aren't interested in, and there's no good way really to micropay. This was something that was discussed forever in the 90s but never implemented. It kind of went a level up, and people could use things like PayPal or later Patreon, but there wasn't any good micropayment system that became widely adopted or standardized. So advertising is interesting. There's a lot of money going through it. The $100 billion this year in the US, that's just in the US, 80 billion or more in 2017, and a tremendous amount of fraud. So when we show this three-sided diagram, we're showing the essential parts of the ecosystem, but there are issues. Users face annoying and creepy and dangerous ads, and this sense of being surveilled or tracked, often for bad purposes, not just annoying ads that retarget you, but actual malware or other things that can stalk you and possibly harm you. And turns out the creators aren't doing too well. Even though there's a lot of money pumped into the system, there's a lot of fraud taken out, there are a lot of intermediaries. So in thinking about how to attack this problem, we decided to start with the users. The users are the ones who still can vote with their feet, as it were, by getting a new browser. There's a fairly low switching cost. There's some inertia, but all the browsers import each other's profile data, your bookmarks, and so on. And so if users feel pain points like these, the delay of loading a page or seeing a usefully rendered first screen is highly variable. It's not 5 seconds. It's not a Gaussian distribution. There's a huge variance and a lot of bad sort of fat tail modes where pages never load on mobile. And that's because of all the trackers. So the number of trackers there on media sites, it's probably even higher this year. Those extra tracking scripts load, and they generate other requests that load more scripts. And so sometimes you never actually get a stable page load. Things just don't load. All the extra traffic runs your radio on your smartphone or tablet, which uses your battery. It's the number 1 or 2 consumer of the battery, depending on how much it's doing, and uses your data plan, which even if you're unlimited, I think we've all run into hidden limits, it costs you one way or another. It's annoying, it's expensive, and it's not worth it. But the icing on the cake really is the sort of malvertising, it's called. Ransomware, like Angler Exploit Kit was big back in 2016. These tend to get defeated and you're on to the next generation. There's a real arms race with these things. They try to take over your computer. In earlier years, it was to convert a PC into an element in a botnet, but ransomware demanding Bitcoin, holding your files encrypted as hostage was coming up fast, 2015, 2016. And it was getting onto reputable online sites like the New York Times, BBC Online. In March, those were among the sites that were compromised by ransomware. How can this happen? How could the New York Times give up advertising space to a malware vendor that's trying to inject ransomware? Well, it turns out they don't deal directly with the malware vendors. They use something called the Lumascape, immodestly named after Terry Kawaja's Luma Partners, which is an M&A business, an investment banking business for trying to help some of these intermediary companies exit. You can barely read this, but you can see it's not drawn to scale. There's Facebook in the upper right, Google's in there, some hot startups that have done well, like the Trade Desk, are in the middle. There's a whole range of sectors or component vendors here with obscure acronyms, and that's part of I think that's part of the scam. They try to baffle you into paying a fee. The arrows that go to the right are generally the funds. Marketing spends a gross advertising budget every quarter or every ad deal, every ad campaign. And the money kind of trickles across. The various vendors take their cut and pass on the net. They do it usually on a schedule, so it's not immediate payment. They try to make sure that somebody didn't rip them off, and there's a lot of non-transparency, so there have been rip-offs. people lie about what the gross versus the net is and what their promised rate that they took was. The other arrows should be measurement and analytics and anti-fraud to confirm that things are happening the way you should, and those two are full of mischief. When you have a system that's complicated, it looks like some kind of Rube Goldberg device or Mad Magazine fold-in. You know it's not going to last. It's got too many intermediaries. It's got too much non-transparency and opportunity for mischief. And that's indeed what's happening. So a lot of the intermediaries, the companies you've never heard of, you've never been to their site, AppNexus, Distillery, used to be 36 Degrees. These companies are going away. They're either being bought by Oracle or the other big IT companies like Salesforce and IBM. Maybe they're being bought by AT&T, NBC, Comcast, Verizon. And the rest of them are, according to Terry Kawaja of Luma Partners, probably going to go out of business. But rising in the usual sort of path-dependent fashion to dominate the system are Google and Facebook, and Amazon is coming on strong too now. It's got a lot of power, as you know. I'm an Amazon Prime member, so it has a lot of first-party information about me as an e-commerce consumer. So when the New York Times had ransomware in an ad, it was because they were using an ad exchange, and an ad exchange gets a fee even if the ad that's coming through is disguised malware. So what does it care? In some ways, the delayed effects and the victim being a consumer whose pictures of grandkids has been held hostage may not even know which site it was that infected their computer. So there won't be any feedback on the exchange. And the way this works in your browser is particularly obnoxious. If you remember I did JavaScript, and JavaScript can generate various elements and even now through APIs call the network to make requests. You get this kind of crazy back and forth going on with all the different alphabet soup parts of the Lumascape. And it not only takes time and adds radio and battery drain, data plan drain, it leaks data. And this is the basis of a complaint Brave has made along with the Open Rights Group and a professor at UCL in London, that under the General Data Protection Regulation, which passed into effect on May 25th, personal data cannot be breached or sent out without user consent. But it is. It's wired into the protocol. It's baked into the open bidding process that's used both by Google and as part of a standard, sort of industry standard by a bunch of other ad exchanges. And it's kind of horrifying. It's how your data tends to get spread all around the world really fast. If you've ever used Chrome and you're in an incognito window and you're pretty sure that you're starting from a clean slate and you know it's not going to save anything in cookies on your system, and then later on you start getting ads for things you looked at in the incognito window, that's because there is actually data being tracked through fingerprinting, possibly through Chrome itself, because Google can use logged-in Chrome navigation data in ad targeting, and the whole process leaks. Even Google's process leaks. DSP stands for Demand-Side Platform. DMP is Data Management Platform. There are so-called SSPs, Supply-Side Platform. Demand-side is the ad side. Supply-side is the publisher side. What the publishers are supplying is space for advertising. What the marketers are demanding is audience. So there's actually an assembly of dossiers on people into audiences based on segments, like I'm loyal to the Honda car maker, or I'm loyal to the Mercedes-Benz brand. If that can be known about me, that's valuable. If it's known that I'm shopping for a new car, or I seem to be looking around at car sites, that's pretty valuable. That's why they assemble these dossiers. But even with all the leakage, it's the first and second place winners. Google, which had a fantastic search business when we partnered in 2004 with Firefox as the browser, they didn't have Chrome then. The search business was pretty clean. You go to search for something based on keywords. They had a third generation of this auction system, second place auction price wins for keywords matched against, keywords in the search query matched against the keywords clustering in the pages based on reputation, how pages link to each other. It's a brilliant search engine, still probably the best for any kind of complex or unique query. That gave Google an opportunity to become big. And I remember talking to Sergey Brin about this because they hadn't bought DoubleClick. They hadn't even done the AdSense, I think, system. I think they were getting ready to do it, by which you could put ads in blog sites. So if you search on Google and you don't like the little texty search ads in the upper right and you click off on the organic links, Google would lose track of you. So after they went public in 2004, I think it was inevitable that they would have to seek a remedy for that by following you around the web. And that's, I think, the number one reason they bought DoubleClick. And DoubleClick at the time was the most successful ad server. I think it started as something called Dart in 2000. And it had a lot of publisher sites where it ran ads, but it also set cookies. Now cookies, who here knows what a cookie is? Another one of these accidental innovations from the 90s, the image, the cookie, and JavaScript were all meant for different reasons from how they're used by advertising. The image was, of course, you could hotlink your friend's cat picture from your friend's server, and it was called hotlinking because if everybody did it, because the cat was really cute, and everybody went to these sites that all linked across to that server, the server could melt from the load. The cookie was really, in 1994, Netscape 1, Luma and Thule created it because the protocol used for transferring web pages, the hypertext transfer protocol, was stateless. So if you ever went to a site that needed to know who you were, maybe you logged into it, if you started your browser over without a cookie, you'd have to log in again. If you just went back to the previous site and forward again, you'd have to log in again. Really annoying. So the cookie was a little bit of storage in your browser associated with that site, but it also turns out cookies were associated with the sites that included the embedded images, like the cat picture. Right there, you have the ability to track people because you can put the cat picture in 2 pages. If you're a new viewer, the cat server gets to see that there's no cookie set. It sets one with a user ID it makes up for you, 1, 2, 3, 4, responds with that cookie, and it gets set for that cat URL from the cat server. You go to a second page that links to the same URL for the image, and sure enough, the cookie is sent. And now you've got a dossier from the cat server's point of view of the user going to the first and the second page. Google bought DoubleClick, and they put search together with display advertising. They bought YouTube, that also was big. They now have Google Play Store for Android. They have in-app ads, which they also acquired along the way. So they have a big business that spans multiple media. And they also, with Google AMP, they're providing faster access to publisher pages. So they're generally winning. They're kind of eating the world while a lot of the publishers are losing. Users who don't like annoying ads, don't like the tracking creepiness or the consequences on your battery or your data plan, or the malvertising, nobody likes that, have reached for ad blockers. But ad blockers are a little confusing. Not everyone knows you can get them. If you get them, the top ones tend to let some ads through for a fee, a little bit of a payola business. On mobile, there's been a more rapid rise, I think mostly in Asia due to a UC web, or so-called UC browser, bought by Alibaba a few years ago for quite a lot of money. It became more popular than Chrome, partly because it blocked ads in India and Indonesia and certain states in India. It also, at the time, was compressing data, not through secure connections, over 2G phone networks that were, of course, slow. So it was very popular for doing things that Chrome wasn't doing. Chrome wasn't blocking ads. At the time, I don't think Google was doing any kind of acceleration over 2G. This is also an inspiration to Brave because we see that users do need to be able to defend themselves. They should be able to get better performance, and they have the means to choose it if they understand how to acquire an ad blocker, and in particular, get a good one that doesn't compromise or take pay-to-play money and let ads through. So it's over 600 million, and it's growing, and this is making a dent in the world, but it's kind of negative because it means somebody's losing revenue. Even if you like the publisher you're visiting, if they're only using what are called impression-based ads, where you're just causing a little bit of money to go through if the ad seems to be visible to you, if it's blocked, if the ad is blocked, that money's not going to your favorite site. So our vision is not just defensive for the user's right to be protected. It's certainly at least that's the baseline. Everything we do starts from that position that the user should have private by default browsing without compromise. And that involves testing, because a lot of browsers don't test with blocking on. We do, and we're still in the midst of automating the way that this always keeps the site working, even though sometimes the site will break if you block its ads. Sometimes if you block a tracking script that should have no consequence on the main publisher content, that script failing to load nevertheless breaks everything. So we're working on systematizing and automating the so-called exception management. At the same time, we want to reform the ecosystems. We want to help publishers. And finally, this idea from my visit to Ethereum in London in 2016 2015 is to reward the users and make it easy for them to pay. Try to implement a version of micropayments that actually works. Doesn't have unwanted cross-subsidy or credit card risk, doesn't impose too much of a cognitive tax on the users. The main baseline benefit of all the protection is the speed. We actually are 8 times faster on certain media sites from just this aggressive blocking. There's sort of a Hydra head spawning process, and as you may remember from Greek mythology, the way to kill the Hydra is not to chop off the head because more grow back, it's to chop it off and cauterize. And so we do that with network level blocking and other kinds of blocking. There's always an arms race, so you have to keep on top of this. We collaborate with other no compromise user first ad blockers like uBlock Origin. We want to let users support their favorite sites. We want to, of course, protect them against other problems to do with ads. Another view of this that people like to look at is the ghost streak tracking graph. It's a D3 ball and stick physics rendering. You can find ghost streak. I think it was sold recently. It is still out there, not necessarily blocking effectively. We noticed it doesn't block, and that was part of its business model, but it does render a view. Almost all this crazy back and forth in this sort of super solar system is mediated through JavaScript on the browser, and that's how it measures things. And some of it is from TMZ to a content distribution network, so that's fine. But there's DoubleClick, there's Rubicon, there's Google Ad Services. There's a bunch of little Lumascape players, some of them probably out of business. This is from 2 years ago. There's Yahoo Analytics. And we block it all. So really what's in the Brave version, which is a mock-up, at the time we didn't support Ghostry when we built this slide, is just the essential edge caches and content distribution networks and domain shards for TMZ. It's a huge speed up. The second part, though, above the baseline is to find a way to let users be directly in the sort of economics of supporting the site. And if you remember, I'll go back to the Lumascape slide. The crazy thing about it is that all the payments are in like US dollars in the US and pounds in the UK and euros in Europe, and they're all based on custom contracts, and there's net 30 or net 15 invoicing, and there's sometimes people stiff each other or, like I said, cheat on how much is actually sent compared to what they promised, or lie about what the gross that they received was. We were blocking all of that economics just by blocking the script. So what could we do to replace it? We had to use something that could be mediated through the browser, and you can't do that with US dollars. Doesn't really work because you end up needing to be some kind of a money transmitter or money services business. You can't easily put the user directly in a peer-to-peer connection with the site. So cryptocurrencies are attractive, and that's what we're using. We prototyped with Bitcoin. We happened to catch Bitcoin when it was going through this sort of scaling crisis before SegWit finally passed after Bitcoin Cash forked. But we also realized it was hard for users to buy. We used a Coinbase buy widget. We evaluated a lot of different ways for people to buy Bitcoin, and Coinbase didn't work in all of our regions, so we looked at other methods around the world, and none of them was really easy to use. It was definitely a challenge getting users to bring their own credit card to bear or debit card to buy Bitcoin. We also didn't have the ability to give users tokens, that social credit currency idea. So in 2017, we did the basic attention token sale, and we created a pool before the sale that we're still using to acquire users and help them get rewarded for all the past abuses of ads and ad tech and tracking. And we funded the project with the proceeds from the sale. And we're using Ethereum lightly because the main blockchains like Ethereum and Bitcoin are not private or anonymous. People like to think they are, but I think after things like Mt. Gox, there was a lot of forensic work done that did track down some of the perps. And there still is forensic work being done. There's an interesting project at Google and using one of the big blockchain analytics companies to find some of those ransomware criminals, because they're sending all that Bitcoin ransom they collect in little 1 or 2 Bitcoin payments from the grandparents who want their grandkids' pictures back that were held hostage. They're tracking those Bitcoin flows to these fairly stable addresses where the criminals are collecting the ransom. In using the basic attention token, we want to let users get grants for nothing, gratis. We want to let them buy BAT if they'd like to supplement the grants we give to users. We'd like to reward creators, and we'd like to give people a private ad option because we think advertising may be necessary. Again, if everybody could just pay for what they use on the internet, it'd be wonderful, but some people are not able to, some people are not willing to, and they shouldn't have to. So we're building a private ad system. We're talking to brands, for example, some of these, or some of the agencies that might be able to get them into ad deals, starting with trials. And we're doing it in a way that is free of tracking, and I'll talk about how that works later. How it looks to you in the new version of Brave Core that's coming out is, instead of putting it in the settings or preferences panel where it's kind of buried, we're going to put it at the top of the user interface, make it easy to take a grant, and start giving it back. In this case, to one of our fans on YouTube who's a creator who's all in for BAT, Bart Baker. The ad model wants to give users a big revenue share. We can only go up from here. It's kind of the App Store minimum. I don't think Apple could ever pay less than 70%. We don't want to. And I mentioned all the non-transparency and sort of theft and fraud that goes on in the Lumascape. We like to have everything transparent. We'd like to have auditability from funding wallet to settlement wallet, so you can see we only took 30%. In the case of any ads on pages or near pages we do with a publisher as a partner, and we would only do them with publisher as a partner, we'll give the publisher 70%. We'll give the user 15%. There's 2 principles you can discern from this. One is we pay the owner of the ad slot 70%, and the other is we pay the user at least as much as we get. And this is all mediated through tokens on your device, in your browser, in an anonymous and private way that does not disclose your identity to anybody. Because at the end of the day, even with the current ad tech, they don't care about you individually unless they're trying to do something you don't want. They just want authentic users. They want to know that their brand message is getting through as an advertiser. Let me see if I can give you a demo. But the advertiser still might get, if they partner with us, this kind of experience. The user would get this only if the user agrees, and then they would get paid. So it's all consent-based. I'm going to take a break here to give a demo. And that demo looks like this. This is an ad test build, but it's coming as a built-in feature to the new release that'll be out in October. So this is your new tab page. Those are the Brave stats. Somebody made a bravestats.tumblr.com where they sort of get people to compete on who's blocked the most tracking scripts ads, who's upgraded the most connections to the secure connection, which is something we also do, based on an extension called HTTPS Everywhere, and the estimate of time saving. And so if you go to bravestats.tumblr.com, you'll see some amazing numbers. People have been keeping their Brave session around for months, but they've also been browsing heavily, and they're just blocking a lot of bad stuff. The Brave ads settings or preferences in this build is experimental. It has some debugging information. I've opened the log. Every time you navigate, you get new events. The events are only local. They inform local machine learning. It's fairly simple. The main trick with machine learning is grooming the data feeds that it studies in a statistical sense. And those data feeds are super valuable. This is the sort of the sum of everything Google hopes to see remotely, but the browser sees it authentically and locally. That's your search queries. Those are yours, not Google's. The results page we don't look at. That's Google's business. But the queries, the keywords are yours. And that query log is a super hot intent source. Your e-commerce forms you fill out, obviously also your data, and that also tells when you buy something online so that there's no need to bother you again. Whereas with advertising using remote scripts and tracking, it seems like every time I buy something, even online, I'm still getting retargeted for it afterwards, which is just dumb. You can adjust the frequency per day. You can adjust the rate per hour. You can possibly give more clues, and when you onboard, we'll allow you to disclose more information. The information you disclose only stays in your browser. It's encrypted there if you synchronize your data across Brave instances, but we never see it on our servers. We don't want to see it. We want to use cryptographic protocols, client-side encryption of your sync data, zero-knowledge proofs, blind certificates, so that we can't see your data. We prefer can't be evil to don't be evil, which hasn't worked out too well for Google. This is the Brave Payments user interface in the current product, more or less, and it's enabled when you opt into the ads, because the easiest thing to do with the user, other than giving them a grant of tokens gratis, is to give them some ad revenue, but by default it goes back to their sites. If we want the user to take it out, we have to, for regulatory reasons and to avoid fraud, have the user then prove to a partner that they're a real person and they pass sort of bank level authenticity checks. So that can be done. If you want to take out your revenue share, it's yours, you can do it. But we think a lot of our users are ecologically minded. They will just let their revenue flow back to their sites, and it will become sort of a circular flow where the user gets a cut, 70% for the user private ads and tabs, that goes back to their sites. And if you want to tune your sites to take a fixed percent of your monthly budget, you can do that. I'm giving 100% to CNET for some reason. If you want to just let your browsing determine who gets what, you can do that. You can turn off sites you don't want to support. And I'm not supporting the IAB, the Interactive Advertising Bureau. No offense to them. A bunch of middle-playing trackers, ne'er-do-wells. And NASA.gov, pay tax for that. So there's some user interface things to fiddle with here. And as I mentioned, in the new product, we're making it more like frequent flyer miles. You'll see it at the top of the user interface. You can click on it and get it to it more quickly, and it can be even easier to use. The worst thing that happens to me with frequent flyer miles is they pile up over the years into some huge amount, and then I finally can use them for a flight. But this is more like use it all the time, let it flow back, and get some more revenue from some more ads. Oh, and so I did get some ads here. I'll show you some that already opened. I was reading various articles about space and also about Elon, and then I got this ad. I think that it thinks I'm some kind of middle-aged crazy guy. But it's a really cool ad. It's very beautiful. This is in Dublin. It looks kind of cool. And the way I got this ad, I'll demonstrate in a minute, was through the machine learning studying my browsing, deciding that I wasn't ready for something because I was not really busy. I wasn't at work in the middle of the day. And it put up a little notification, and I decided to click on it, and I got an ad in the tab. Now, right away, that's a big difference from the shotgun approach of sticking ads into publisher pages. The so-called first-party content, the publisher's content, has to give up space to the ads, the third-party content. They sometimes can be in conflict. There can be what's called brand unsafe placement, where the good brand, the ad, gets put against very bad content, and the brand that bought the ad space is very unhappy. We've all seen the reverse, which is where you're reading a pretty good website, but you're getting these awful, wrinkle cream or parasite picture ads, taboola and Outbrain ads. We don't believe that conflict is the right way to go. We want to lift the best ads out of the first party, the publisher page, into a separate tab. And then not only do they have more room and they're not in conflict or potential conflict, you also can have a long-lived tab. If you don't like it, you can close the tab, but if you like it, you could keep it around, you could engage with the brand, you could form a relationship. And you're not immediately identified to the brand, but if you choose to, you could become. Some of the more valuable ad forms here are essentially called cost per lead, because if you're looking at a motorcycle, you might make an appointment. Or if you're buying a car, you might make a dealer appointment or arrange for them to bring the car to your house. And those cost per lead ads are quite valuable. So I guess it thought I was going to buy, it discerned I'm a Honda loyalist. That's pretty amazing. I don't play golf. Maybe I should. So let's go back to the ad dashboard. And for demo purposes, I can click this button. And there's a notification. We're still improving the user interface, but it's a little bit of a texty sort of search ad like you get on Google search pages. It has a little capability of doing HTML5 images and has a little bit of a canvas to paint on, but it's not annoying. It's not big, it's not in your face. And if you like it, you can view it, or if you don't like it, you can close it. If you view it, you get a new tab, PetSmart. I do have pets, my children have pets. I'm always buying supplies. So the agent's doing an okay job here. That's the main ad model. That's the user-facing ad model. And we're partnering with some publishers who might want to do the ads in the page too, but only if the user agrees and the publisher agrees with that revenue split I mentioned. So let me go back to this. And yeah, it's a better world, I think, for everybody. It gets rid of the intermediaries. That's where the savings come from. It pays 70%. Currently, third-party ads, programmatic ads, so-called, are paying notionally 40%. That's one study, but it's actually a lot less due to fraud. These numbers are a little out of date. We're at 4.6 million monthly active users now. We do have a lot of user wallets. We're going to grow even more as we bring the basic attention token to Android and even to iOS. So 80% mobile means these wallets are only from the 20% that's desktop. 20% of 4.6 million is, you know, what is that? It's like a million almost, or 900,000. So half of them have wallets, roughly. We have a lot of verified publishers. I think it's now over 21,000. The majority, 14,500, I think now, are YouTube creators, but the others are domain owners like Washington Post, Guardian, Vice, and others, Dow Jones Media Group. So these are KPIs that are slightly out of date. We're growing fast, and we're going to keep growing. I think we're going to go faster as we go. This is a projection of the growth. We also have focused on Android because it was the sort of big mobile platform, it was the cleanest. But iOS, we're hopeful. I'll say something that I've said at other meetups. The App Store has various rules. We're hoping to thread the needle with some of them. Other rules govern what so-called virtual currencies you can use. And it turns out the basic attention token is an approved virtual currency in the iOS App Store for apps to use, which is good news for us. You know, lots of other cryptocurrencies are, Litecoin, Dogecoin, but Apple does not put a complete list out, and you have to actually get their approval. And we got it on behalf of our partner Uphold for the BAT. So we're growing, we're going to grow faster, and I think we'll exceed these curves. You can see Windows is the second most popular OS, and iOS is third, Mac OS. We need to work on Linux more. But all of these numbers should improve quite a bit, especially as we get the new version of Brave out, as we get the basic attention token features, the Brave rewards, so-called, and the ads into mobile. This is part of the collection of people. We've got really awesome people, surprising number of ex-physicists. Maybe someday we'll go back to physics and work on a spaceship. We've been structuring the roadmap for the basic attention token in phases. We've gotten through the first phase, which gave the token utility. That started last year. Instead of Bitcoin, people could acquire the BAT through a grant or by buying it, and then give it automatically and anonymously to their favorite sites, and we added YouTube. And now we're in phase two. We're in the middle of it, trying to get the ad agent to work well for users first. We're doing user trials. That's what I was demoing. Heading soon toward market trials with advertisers, where we'll give them a discount, see if they like it. The advertisers are always game for a new experiment. The brands have money to spend. They're worried about ad blocking. They're worried about GDPR. They're concerned about fraud, though not as much as you'd think, unfortunately, because marketing's an art, not a science. So they don't really know if their money's going to waste. But we can get ad deals. I'm pretty confident. They're the sort of the gamest part of the ecosystem. The publishers started out a few years ago as angry because, you know, Brave is in part an ad blocker, sort of an old category, a category we kind of reject because it's been corrupted by the pay-to-play ad blockers who let ads through. But we've gotten them to come around because they've been suffering for years, and they're seeing no way out now. They're seeing it's not ad blocking that's torturing them. It's the rise of the Google and Facebook duopoly. It's the number of intermediaries who take fees and leave them with nothing. It's the huge amount of ad fraud, 20% or more, that involves fake sites, fake New York Times, that can steal real ad revenue that should have gone to them and fool all the anti-fraud scripts easily. So after we prove the ad model and get the whole thing kind of into a reduced form that can go into other apps, an SDK, we're going to take it to other apps. In the meantime, we're going to work to standardize a lot of things that this hangs upon, like The web standards did not really take on things like anonymous payments or advertising or donations in any way at all. After the browser wars 1 ended, things like PayPal rose, centralized solutions rose, and the standards just did not address payments. Now you're seeing payment request API in the W3C, so there's some abstraction around using a credit card or possibly using a cryptocurrency to pay. It's quite late, and it doesn't cover everything we're doing. So we're going to keep working with Apple in particular, Mozilla, and others, Samsung if we can, to improve the web standards. To talk about this higher domain of discourse of anonymous payments, donations, of anonymous ads. You might wonder how we do the ads with high privacy. Normally, you're just leaking data out to trackers who then kind of arbitrage each other and try to get paid for helping to target ads at you. We block all that stuff, so our ads involve, instead of sending out anything, bringing a fixed catalog for a large region, a large population of users to your device. It's not a list of the ads in all their glory, images and videos. Those are big. It's just the edge cache URLs and some keywords and metadata about those ads. So each row is like a URL with some keywords. And it compresses well, and it updates. As old ads expire, they roll off, and new ones can come in, can be delta updated. That catalog doesn't identify you to download. So again, just to restate it, our baseline is protected. We don't have any ads. If you want ads, you consent and opt into the program, as I did in that demo build, that user trial build. And then the local machine learning agent studies your history. When you onboard, you can give more details. It all stays local and private. And that helps the decision making that picks the ads from the catalog. So the frequency slider bounds how often it does this. It also tries not to do it when you're busy at work. You're looking for a camera at lunch, can't quite find the right model at the right price, you go back to work. Machine learning agent doesn't bug you until later that night, and then it puts up one of those notifications saying, hey, here's a camera deal. If you like it, you might buy it, you get 70% of the gross ad spend. And the matching is private because it picks from the same catalog everybody downloads. The sort of attribution, it's called, or confirmation, normally involves a bunch of follow-on scripts that track you through the conversion process or through seeing the ad impression and need to identify you and are creepy and leak data. Instead, we use essentially zero-knowledge proofs and blind certificates. In the case of ads, we use blind certificates to confirm the ad actions without your identity. It's a great innovation from David Chaum that has finally received more use over the last 15 years, I would say, than it did when it was first invented by Chaum. And we want to also use the blockchain more as we go, as it scales more, but we certainly can use it for things that involve aggregate data that doesn't identify anybody, just counters for segments, coarse buckets of interest. And that's something that advertisers need in order to forecast, so that feeds back into the campaign planning that they do. I hope that helps. There's a lot of detail there, so I can answer questions anytime. I'll stop here. Thank you.
So when I'm just browsing on Google or Chrome or whatever, I don't really have an incentive to click on a bunch of pages to load ads so that I get paid my 15%. Are you vulnerable to people just setting up like Brave clicker loader virtual browsers or whatever to
yeah, and 70% is even juicier, right? If they could impersonate a Brave user, they could get the 70%, which is even bigger. So yes, fraud cannot be solved by blockchain. That's kind of elemental, but there's still a bunch of blockchain projects that kind of add sort of slow public ledger recordation to the Lumascape to try to wring fraud out. The problem is that the fraud happens at the sort of endpoint with those fake users who are browsing the fake New York Times to steal the ad revenue that should have gone to the real New York Times. Let me talk about that in a little more detail. There was a fraud operation that was codenamed MethBot by White Ops Security. I'm friends with the founders. They wrote it up. It's on their site. You go to whiteops.com/methbot. It's spelled like it sounds. They named it because the code comments referred to meth a lot amid the Russian or whatever the comments were written in. So I assume they were binging on Breaking Bad in seasons 1 through 6. And they wrote this code because it was elaborate. It was a bunch of cloud headless browsers impersonating users, loading fake pages, like fake New York Times pages, scraped content, but embedding real ads. Now you realize the advertiser is putting these ads in what it thinks is the New York Times, and it knows it can be defrauded, so it adds a little bit of extra anti-fraud protection in the form of JavaScript that kind of looks around and says, is this really the New York Times? Is this really a user clicking and viewing the ad? And it studies even the sort of distribution of events, keyboard and mouse events, the sensor events. It tries to say, does this look like a human? Is this clicking through pages or clicking on the ad the way a human does? So that level of anti-fraud is done in the ad industry today. MethBot completely defeated it. And the reason is, it's easy to fake. The JavaScript is running in this fake New York Times. It's kind of looking around to see if it's the real New York Times, but it's in the matrix. It's being fooled. And as you recall from the first movie, unless you see the black cat twice, the glitch in the matrix, when the agents change it, you don't know that you're in the matrix. Ready Player One had that great scene where Sorrento's still inside the Oasis, but he doesn't know it. So that's what they do to these, these fake pages and these real ads in order to steal. Now, we don't want that to happen to us, but we don't have to rely on JavaScript on the page, which has no guarantee about anything. It's been loaded, it could have been fooled, it has no integrity guarantees. Its environment that it counts on, the standard JavaScript objects, could be completely faked. The New York Times that it looks around to see if it's real, easy to fake. We're looking at things from C++ code in the browser. That cannot be tampered with, that cannot be faked out so easily. We still have to look at the events from the user. We still have to look at the sensor inputs. And even if it's a mobile phone, is it being carried the way a human carries it? Is the accelerometer recording motions that are natural and human-like? That obligation applies to us as well as to any other anti-fraud concern. But we can do a better job, we can have high integrity, we can lock it down into native code, and we can check that that code hasn't been tampered with using secure hardware, essentially, the same kind of hardware that's used for DRM, which I'm not fond of. But this hardware was invented to, at the very least, prove that a certain bit of code inside what's called a secure enclave by Intel, or a secure zone in ARM, was not tampered with. So anti-fraud is an obligation on us too, but we have fewer moving parts, we have native code, we have hardware integrity checks, and we can get an authentic look at the human through the sensors that we know are on the device. But yes, we have to worry about fraud too, you're right. And people do try to rip off our grants already. Since we're giving out back grants, that's a fraud magnet. And indeed, people try to steal them. The only way they can really settle is toward a publisher who verifies with us, one of those 21,000 or more. Those verifications happen with our partner Uphold taking care of the bank, like, are you a legit actor with a ID card we can scan, and other proof of identity, and maybe a tax identifier number. Fraudsters are willing to make those up. The MethBot operation was taking 3 to 5 million a day, 2 billion a year. So they were obviously just faking a bunch of identities on the payment side from the ad companies that were paying them, thinking the ads were really seen by humans. So we do have fraud, and we do have to fight it, but we have the ability to watch for the grant takers funneling all their grants towards some crummy YouTube account that has no videos or one video. And then we can also look at the addresses of the grant takers, the internet addresses. We don't blind ourselves to that yet. We do have Tor as an option. But for the grant takers, we think, and our terms say, you have to be willing to let us see your IP address, because we'll see people using cloud IP addresses or colo at IP addresses. They're not at home. The fraudsters are very sophisticated, though. With MethBot, they would use, for the fake users that were running in the cloud, they would use residential IP addresses. How did they get residential IP addresses? Well, it turns out they called up some big colo that can get lots of IP addresses, and they said, we're from Verizon South, V-E-R-I-S-O-N, misspelled. And we'd like some residential IPs for our Atlanta home internet service. And they got a block, and it was all used for fraud. So it's really amazing what the fraudsters do. And that's because even though there's an arms race, there's a profit to be made, and the money's being pumped in by the marketers. And the marketers never get fired for spending too much. They get fired for spending too little.
So can I ask, how do you get consent for GDPR? What is the process?
Well,
from a publisher perspective, from an advertiser?
what the GDPR is about is personal data. And its model involves something called a controller. We are not a controller. The browser is the user agent, runs on the user's device. The controller model is about the Googles and the Facebooks and the other remote servers. We don't see your data on our servers. It's all blinded.
Relying on the controller to get the consent.
No, because there's no controller in Brave. The browser does get the consent. None of this ad and donation stuff is on by default. You have to go into the user interface and turn it on yourself. So we don't make you do that to use Brave. You just use Brave out of the box, and it is a protective, faster browser. That's it. Everything else is opt-in. The consent is only local. The actions are only local. When you think about the GDPR model, it's very abstract. You might think, okay, well, maybe my operating system's the controller. Doesn't Microsoft or Apple have to worry about GDPR 2? Not yet. And it has sort of this fractal applicability. You could apply it to every part of the stack. Does my DNS authority server that resolves my names that I use to browse, is that a controller? Well, maybe it is, but not yet. So we take the point of view that the controller and the whole design of GDPR is about the remote computers, not about your computer, and not yet about things like your DNS authority server, which is probably something your ISP set up for you. You could use OpenDNS, you could use another server. Mozilla is experimenting with using a Cloudflare service for encrypted DNS. There are options, but GDPR does not apply yet in those spaces, and it wasn't really designed for those spaces. Because of this fractal nature, is your operating system kernel, like Linux or Windows or Mac, is that a controller? That sees a lot of your traffic and it sees IP addresses that are routed. This is an area that has to be developed through regulatory decisions and case law. That's why people complain about GDPR. They say, oh, all it's doing is causing these annoying cookie dialogues. Well, we already had those for the last 10 years since the cookie directive. Now they're getting worse because I think completely lawlessly, they're just assuming that if they add more cookie dialogues that try to get your consent to be tracked, that they can just check the box and say they're compliant. They're not compliant. You know who else isn't compliant? Facebook is not compliant. They were taking your phone number as a second factor for login and then using it for ad targeting. There's something in the GDPR that's also important called purpose limitation. You can't do that under GDPR. If you took it for second factor for login, that's all you can use it for. You cannot use it for ad targeting. So Facebook's in violation right there. Google's been taking data from us for 20 years for various purposes and mixing it all up and linking it together, pretty clearly in violation. This is all going to get sorted out. The commissioner, the big data authority commissioner in Europe, wrote a piece in the Washington Post. He said, you're going to see a decision by the end of this year. This is not something that we're counting on as a business, but it is happening, and it shows, I think, in part, a rising consciousness about privacy and personal data and the value of it. And it could go wrong, and some people say it already is wrong because it's crushing all these tracking businesses, and Google isn't yet crushed. But I think Google was already going to succeed where a lot of these businesses, like Terry Kawaja said, were going to go out of business. So the point of GDPR is not to determine who the winners are, it's to make sure people's rights about their personal data are respected. And to that extent, we're aligned with it.
You're having issues with scaling the ERC20. What are type of your requirements that you hope to get out of blockchain?
Well, yeah, we're looking at Plasma. We're looking at anonymity tech on in-state channels or things like that. But we don't need them yet because we're semi-decentralized. We're using only one transaction every 30 days that the user operates. That's why when I was back here using this payment system, this allows things like repudiation. I don't have to commit my monthly budget until the 30th day, and I get a little notification saying, do you want to check your payments? And I can turn things off or adjust the pinning. That makes a very light load on the network. In fact, since we're using Uphold as a partner because a lot of the publishers want to be paid in fiat, it's not shocking. Some of them want BAT, some of them might want Bitcoin, and you have to go from BAT to Bitcoin to fiat. We can do that, but most of them want fiat, and that means that Uphold can help us optimize. So it turns out they can do some things off-chain. It's semi-centralized. I know this is considered bad by some people who want us to jump to the fully decentralized future now. Can't build it that way. We have to build it in steps. But as we go, we are interested in Plasma. We are interested in state channels. We're interested in, if not fully decentralized settlement, which is a little tricky, at least multiple settlement partners, multiple options. a sort of distributed set of choices for settlement. I would hope people would want to use crypto more and more, and we wouldn't need any of this. We can go peer-to-peer through an anonymous protocol. That may happen, but it turns out a lot of people still want fiat. They have to pay their staff salaries and their IT bills in fiat.
So right now, you don't need it. If you could have it, would you want it now?
Yeah, I think we could. I mean, you can always, people who use Brave, you can always take the fee in the browser. Everything we do is sort of client-side, so we're not sending anything through our servers of necessity. What we have now is this one transaction to uphold every 30 days. We have a separate set of zero-knowledge proofs that goes through an IP masking service to our centralized blind accounting server. And that's what basically gets a set of votes in separate sessions. The zero-knowledge proof protocol is called Anonyze, and it doesn't allow linking of any site to any other, so they can't assemble a fingerprint for you, because your top 10 sites could identify you uniquely, and they don't link to your identity. So that's what we do now. If we could move a lot of that on-chain, we would and we will, and so we're looking at the next generation, sort of L2 and other work in Ethereum, and we're not running out of steam on Ethereum. People also, there's this sort of catastrophism. There was a piece, what was it, in TechCrunch? Ethereum's going to die, it's going to go to zero. It's like, no, it's not. There is innovation coming. The price is probably bottoming, it's hard to say. If you believe the chartists, it might be. We're still sticking with Ethereum. If you create enough value with any kind of coin, or especially a token, I think there are options, kind of risky, or big options, big flag day options to migrate to a different chain, should that prove necessary. But we're not thinking about or worried about it right now. We're more interested in what can Ethereum do to help us decentralize, offload, let people go peer-to-peer. Some of our users do favor only sites that want to get paid peer-to-peer, and we can do that. We can facilitate that, and we need to facilitate that and bypass Uphold, and that's coming. We've talked about that as being an ETH wallet, ERC20 capable ETH wallet that people will be able to use. Sort of the ideal case, it's kind of rare to find people like this, but the ideal case is that everybody who uses a browser is also some kind of creator. It's like a symmetry. You can use your ETH wallet to give to your other creators, and they can also use their ETH wallets to collect. And it can be peer-to-peer. So we're okay with it. We just aren't pushing on it because a lot of people still want fiat.
Yeah, I think you just touched upon it there. I'm not familiar with Uphold, but that was basically the one piece I'm missing. What do publishers do with that? Because I'm guessing not everyone just wants to buy advertisements for their site.
Yeah. So the Washington Post came and verified. The verification is self-serve. It's sort of like when you're getting a domain certificate from Let's Encrypt. It's based on the same sort of ACME protocol, a challenge response protocol. You come to our site, you say, I want to be a Brave publisher because I know some of the Brave users are sending some tokens my way. If you're Washington Post and many others, your IT, legal, and finance departments do not want crypto. They just don't want the risk. They don't want the volatility. They want fiat. So they verify with Uphold, and that takes care of the sort of know your customer checks that Uphold as kind of a bank-like entity has to do. And we have to know something about them, but we don't have to do that. That's not us, that's Uphold. Uphold can do the exchange to fiat. And the verification means getting a secret hash of a big random number. You put it in a DNS text record or in a text file on your site after we send it to you, and then we see it there and we know you own control of your domain. With YouTube and Twitch, it's different. It's OAuth based, but because every OAuth implementation is a little different, but they all have a way of sort of having fresh credentials presented and validated. We can check that you own your YouTube account or your Twitch account, and that's how you authenticate those and verify those and get paid. And that's even slicker, I think, because Uphold can do it all in one fell swoop. And again, there are some people who don't like Uphold. They don't want to do it. They say, why do I need Uphold? Why can't I just get the tokens? Well, because of regulations, because of fraud concerns on our part, mainly regulations. I mean, if we were in a world where this wasn't required of us, we still might have fraud issues. We could solve those perhaps with this sort of vision of reputation on the blockchain, where you can sort of check to see if this address you're transacting with is a good actor. That's the hope. Nobody's pulled it off yet. We're talking about partnering with Civic now, or we're going to do it for this ETH wallet. Civic has that vision too, but they're still doing ID card scanning. They're still doing conventional KYC. The world isn't quite switched over to blockchains enough that you can be sure of reputation. People can get multiple addresses and be good on one and bad on the other. You see this with credit cards, right? Friendly fraud. Someone's a good credit card user, except once in a while they just do something really bad, and the credit card companies have to watch out for that too. But we're using Uphold to offload this, and we could use other entities, like we could use Coinbase or Revolut in the UK. There are other banks or third generation banks, whatever they're calling them, that can do this. Sorry, let me take.
I was curious if you're looking at using smart contracts for commerce, for working with some of these ad exchanges, and how that might be working within your ecosystem.
Yeah, the ad exchanges are all, like I said, getting paid, whether it's malware coming through or it's a good ad going to a fraud actor who's faking the site and the user. So we can't work with them. They all depend on tracking. They all depend on this pervasive surveillance game that all the tracking businesses play. If our users suddenly tried to get ads from them, like if we showed up as Brave and pretended to be a publisher like the fraud actors do, they might look at us and say, you're not allowed, or they might say, okay, you can do it, but why can't I see your users? They're all invisible because we block their trackers. They would look like they're off the grid, and they wouldn't perform. At the very least, they might just say, this looks like fraud, I'm not going to pay you. So we can't use exchanges. All these ad deals have to be direct from the brands and their agencies. High-value users, off-the-grid users, Brave users are of high value. They do a lot of e-commerce and searching. They have high socioeconomic status generally, but not necessarily. And we think that advertisers want to reach them so we can get these ad deals, but we cannot go to exchanges for them. Using smart contracts would hit scaling issues if we did it all the time. Also, if you are on the blockchain taking ads or giving donations a lot, you're fingerprinting yourself. So you need something like ZK snarks or Starks you need some kind of anonymity tech, and that's not built into the chains yet. So I'm sorry to be negative on exchanges, but they've been facilitating things like MethBot. When White Ops did their MethBot study, they said, we did it with Index. Now Index is a big ad exchange, and Index immediately said, halo over our head, we didn't, we're clean now. White Ops helped us discover MethBot, and we cleaned it up right away. And no other exchanges admitted they were involved in the MethBot fraud. But MethBot was taking $2 billion a year. That's a lot. That's multiple exchanges facilitating fraud. And the problem, I have to go back to the Lumascape slide because I've been learning more about this over the years. The amount of fraud is huge. There's a professor, Augustin Fu, he's an adjunct professor at NYU, and he consults on this, and he is on Twitter. You can see his Twitter account's ACFOU. He estimated 20% or 16 billion in 2017 was taken by fraud. And I talked to him in New York just 4 days ago, and he said, that could be low. It could be much more than that. The problem is almost every part of the system likes fraud. The marketer puts the money in, and it's an art, not a science. So they don't know if it's going to waste. Their agencies have to give weekly performance reports where the fraud actually makes the numbers better week by week. So the 24-year-old in the agency gets promoted based on fraud warming up the numbers. At the end of the quarter, the sales aren't there. The CMO can blame the weather, can blame the sales jerks, can blame the tech. Doesn't know what went wrong because it's an art. It gets worse as you go. The fraud risk compounds. Everybody in the system is kind of codependent with fraud. The exchanges certainly are. Even publishers, if they aren't utterly fake publishers, and by the way, Dr. Fu has studied this system, and he'll show you that the top publishers we all know, the New York Times, get 10% of the money that's spent, of the 100 billion this year, 80 billion last year. They get 10% of the money, but they only get 1% of the impressions. What does that mean? 99% of the impressions going to the bottom 90% by quality of the sites means there's a lot of fraud, and it means that the impressions are not valuable because they're almost 10 times as many. And he actually surveyed a lot of the bottom of the heap publishers, and they're sites that start with 000 AAA, and these are totally fake sites. These are sites that were meant to steal ad revenue. So there's just a lot of fraud, even on the publisher side. If it's a legit publisher, it might do some fraud or might participate in some fraud to warm its numbers up. Dr. Fu says he sees ad campaigns where the marketer is not really performing well, and then at the end of the month, when they have to suddenly perform well, at 11 PM, suddenly a bunch of ad impressions form, more than any human could possibly do for that site because it's not a highly trafficked site. So there's this sudden rush to make the deadline, and then they publish monthly stats, and it looks, oh, you just assume it's uniformly distributed. Okay, maybe that site could have gotten that many impressions over the whole month. But they couldn't have gotten in the last hour of the month, and that's when they all came in. That's fraud. So there's a ton of fraud in this system. That's one of the reasons why we think by blocking all the stuff, which we do protectively, and then reconnecting things through the basic attention token, we can have a cleaner, simpler system, we can control fraud, and we can pay the user out of what was going to these intermediaries, all these alphabet soup, sort of surveillors and cheaters and exchanges. You're not going to miss AppNexus. It got sold to AT&T. I was kind of glad because it was trying to go public and it just couldn't do it, and I thought it was going to have a really bad exit. AT&T wants to take on Google by acquiring companies and looking at your AT&T traffic and profiling you. I don't think they're going to take on Google, but I also don't think AppNexus is going to be super valuable in the future. So we block that stuff and we try to remediate things through the BAT. And that's really where I think we can add a lot of value for our users. And our users, being off the grid makes them valuable. Being aware of privacy and conscious of their web use makes them valuable. And then we'll get to the point where we can take this to other apps and standardize pieces as we go. I'll answer more questions.
Yeah, are you planning on bringing this to native apps such as video games, streaming stuff?
Yeah.
And if so, how are you going to do it? Because now you do it with the browser, but then it's like 1,000 video games that communicate with us.
Yeah, and there's a fraud risk with games. In fact, a lot of mobile apps have, I know a company, Kochava, that studied this. Mobile ad attribution is almost all fraudulent. Dr. Fu has studied this too, and you get a bunch of fake apps. Just like you get those sites 000aaa.something.com, you also get crazy Java package names for the Android apps, and they're fake apps. What we're building here can be reduced into a code base that fits in one of these secure enclaves. That's an open SDK, open source, integrity checked, and go into other apps. When we did the BAT sale, we were immediately got pinged from Mozilla. Opera's expressed interest. Almost anybody who's not Google has expressed interest. Apple, they make so much money they don't need to express interest, but I think they like the idea. They approved the BAT in the App Store. So we would make the BAT part of a standard. In the long run, it doesn't matter if it's BAT, if there could be other cryptocurrencies if people want, that's fine. We want the web standards to support this idea of anonymous transactions. They can be peer-to-peer or they can be mediated for anonymity purposes if the chain can't do it, for settlement purposes if the payee wants exchange to fiat, needs KYC. That needs to be standardized. So we're building toward a system that's like an evolved form of the web, and it can support a BAT SDK or something that works per the standards, the future standards, the same way the BAT SDK works in games, in podcast apps, in other browsers, in video players. It's going to take a while. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. The way we got the browser restarted with Firefox, the way we did HTML5, which you remember I said we started in 2004, it didn't really get going until years of spec writing, mostly by Ian Hickson, who went from Opera to Google, until like 2010 when Microsoft finally came on board and said, okay, HTML5, I guess we have to do it now. Chrome had already come out by then, which I think changed their attitude. So it takes a long time. People don't like standards because they take a long time and they think, why can't it be the next year's WWDC and you wave a wand and it's all better? Even Apple can't do that, right? They always have awesome stuff, but they can't change the whole web in that time frame. So this is going to take a few years to get to that better world, but I think if we get the users, we get the growth that I showed, and we bring the app, the BAT to other apps, we will get there.
Yeah, I have maybe like a two-part question, but if I have like a new machine that I want to transfer to or something like that, how do the funds somehow transfer over to the new machine? Is that possible?
So there is a wallet, which is an Ethereum account, and that's on the blockchain in the sense that you have the hash of the public key that is the address. You have the private key, which you have to keep safe. That's not tied to your browser profile. Now, the private key may be in your browser profile, so don't wipe that out. There's a backup procedure for that. Please use that. It's a word list. You should keep it on paper and save it in the safe. what we're building in steps. So initially, you'll be able to sync your profile, especially your bookmarks, from like your mobile device and your laptop together using a private key. We don't see that data is all encrypted. We can't decrypt it. We're adding the BAT to mobile. The very first iteration will probably have a separate wallet address and therefore account for the mobile. Some people might like that because their mobile browsing, they might want to keep separate from their desktop or laptop browsing. We think that should eventually be an option to have the same wallet address, same account. But again, it's on the blockchain. You should back up the private key, and you can be sure that if you lose all your devices, you can still get your funds back.
Is there a private key that I have access to,
Yes. And when we add this ETH wallet option, you can just use that. That's your wallet. You'd want a separate wallet if you want large value to be stored there. People tend to lose these keys, right? This is the other thing about crypto that most people aren't ready for. They send to the wrong address and they want a refund. It's not going to happen. The private key is in the browser profile. It's in your Windows user data. Windows 10 has this clear my user data. People say, YOLO, and they press the button, and it's gone. And they forgot to do the wordless backup, so they're out of luck. If you do the wordless backup, then you can recover. And that's the necessary step. When people want privacy, the flip side is they have to manage their key. They have to manage security, and there's no free lunch.
If you're sending tokens to various people, has the IRS come knocking yet and say you have to find a way to make sure that these tokens you give out are being accounted for as income?
Uphold 1099s them. So if they're in, or W8 Benny. Uphold is like a bank. It's in part a chartered U.S. bank. It has exchange capability to various fiat currencies around the world. It does not cover all regions, so we're looking for other partners. I mentioned Revolut, Coinbase is an option. They take care of the tax issue. Giving out these grants, these are de minimis. These are not tax events. We give small grants, notionally $5 equivalent. BAT's kind of volatile like all crypto because all crypto is kind of correlated because crypto risk is often affecting every crypto. But BAT's among the least volatile. This was studied at least at the end of 2017 by Willy Woo. His Twitter handle is Woonomic. It's a nice chart that includes US dollar tether, which is almost but not quite flat. Bitcoin, which is the second least volatile in the basket he looked at. And the first above US dollar tether that's least volatile, except for US dollar tether, was BAT.
What do you think that is?
Well, I think it's partly luck, and we were small, and liquidity was low in 2017, just to be totally honest. But I also think if our model works, and speculation, which we can't control, which we don't endorse and don't recommend, gets dominated by the transactions through the private ledger, through the browsers, through this kind of dashboard. There's a velocity sync here because there's your monthly budget tied up for 30 days, and there's settlement afterwards. So we think if we just increase the user base, we increase the transactions, velocity is controlled, things should be stable, all else equal, the BAT should become more dear because it's a capped sale. Our white paper has an appendix 7.3 that discusses price stability and makes an argument for increasing price stability as the system grows. We'll see if it's true. I'm not sure if it was operative in the era that Willy Woo studied. I'm trying to get him to do a new volatility study. But yeah, BAT is not, goes back to the question, if you have crypto and you are speculating or you're investing for the long haul, you're hodling, you want to use other wallets. You want to keep your keys backed up, and you want not to have those at risk when you're just using $10 a month or $5 a month to give back, or you're earning that ad revenue and giving it back. That's kind of the stuff you could walk away from, right? If you lose $7 because you wiped your partition, just start over.
Speaking of standards, is there already a standard for the advertising criteria that
There are industry, there are vendors and trade groups like IAB that try to make standards. It's a clown show. There's something that happened called rebrokering where, because of this whole Lumascape with the crazy ad exchanges and all the intermediation, publishers would give up their space and find that instead of getting the good deals they were promised and the better revenue, the ads that should have gone in their slot went to their competitor publisher. Gizmodo instead of Engadget. And I even talked to Jason Kalkanis about this. He said, yeah, we tried programmatic and we got ripped off. All our competitors grew at our expense, and this is a common story. And the revenue share went down over time, year by year. Cory Doctorow had the same experience at Boing Boing. So there's no standards here. So the IAB said, oh, that's bad. Why can't you prevent rebrokering by requiring that every vendor listed in a file called ads.txt, sort of like robots.txt, in the root of the document tree, must be only a supply-side vendor. That is, it works for the publisher, it doesn't rebroker. Well, that's an advisory or honor system. Guess what happened? A bunch of publishers started listing their vendors. If you ignore all the typo domain names, which there were many of, sure enough, some of those vendors that were supposedly gold star supply-side only vendors were going under the table, dealing under the table, rebrokering, playing the demand side. So it's just a system that is lacking in integrity as a security property. It's lacking in authenticity. It's full of these ad hoc de facto standards that are, like Dr. Augustine Fu said, they're kind of like CYA. Like even the brands say, oh, we want anti-fraud pixels. So we found this vendor and they say they can stop fraud. They check the box, anti-fraud solved. And in fact, fraud is 20% or 40%. No one really knows. We'll work to do it. There's a new community group in the W3C. There are even some people on the Chrome team who want to work on this. So we're going to talk to them in Lyon in a few weeks at TPAC. It has to be done in this sort of slow standards process where you try to bring on enough vendors. Clearly, Apple is privacy conscious. They've always blocked third-party cookies since Safari first came out. They evolved that into intelligent tracking prevention. We're doing similar things in Brave by default. We have common cause to standardize things around third-party cookies and bounce tracking, redirect tracking. There are other areas of interest, including with Samsung. I'm not sure about Microsoft. I know a bunch of people there, and we talked to them. They like Brave, but they can't take those chances because I think the Bing division gets mad at them. I believe Bing will not do a default search deal with a browser that blocks ads by default. Last I checked. We haven't tried for it. Bing is such a thing that it's actually gotten better. This was true 10 years ago. I knew somebody who was a Google fellow, and I knew him from Netscape. He said, you take the short query, 2 or 3 keyword queries, and you run them through Bing and Google. You swap the branding. You do blind tests. Everyone says the Google results are best. In fact, they're identical because Bing on the short queries does as good a job as Google. But on the long queries, the unique queries, 4 or 5 keywords or queries no one ever before uttered that you did because you were searching some obscure ancient history, Google's the best. And they probably will be forever for this model of search because they have the oldest corpora, oldest set of data, and the oldest and most mature machine learning that they've co-evolved to index it and study it. And Bing is trying to chase them. It was getting subsidized for a long time. It was ironically giving Google antitrust relief in the US because if you look at server logs to look for hits from search engines, Google was like 80%, 85%, maybe 75% sometimes. So Bing was in there kind of, and Yahoo, which was white label Bing for a long time, I don't know if it matters anymore, Verizon, Oath, I don't know what it's called anymore, was third. And so you got some relief from the claim that Google owned the search market. In Europe, Google is 95% of the search hits on server logs. It is under anti-competitive scrutiny in the EC. It's under actual, I think that some of the investigations have gone to fines. There was the one about shopping and promoting stuff through Google instead of through these recommendation services. So yeah, Bing's still a thing. But Microsoft probably is interested because I think they're losing browser share still to Chrome, to Brave. If you look at the browser stats, UC Browser is still coming up, though I learned something recently that's disturbing. UC Browser may be doing some sort of background page loading and ad viewing to up its numbers. The Cheetah browser does that. So fraud, I mentioned the fraud temptation even for publishers. It applies to some less reputable browsers. But yeah, almost every browser that's not captured by an advertising business in whole or in part is interested in what we're doing, and we can probably standardize things on that basis.
You said it's going to take a few years, so I'm wondering, when will Brave be as well known as Chrome and Safari? When do you anticipate that happening?
Those browsers have enormous advantages. Like when we were doing Firefox and we showed Google how to do a browser, they did Chrome, And I remember telling Larry Page, yeah, you guys should do your own browser. And they did Chrome cleanly. They made it a better browser in 2008, September 1st it came out. And they didn't start pushing it through distribution channels. They didn't put it on the sides of London buses and big ads until a few years later. But once they did that, that's a lot of marketing spend. It's hard to compete with that. So we're not ready to go head-to-head on that basis. What you do when you conquer a browser market is you get the lead users. This is a category studied by, among others, Eric von Hippel at MIT. Lead users are actually innovators. They're creators. Lead users invented Nike running shoes. Windsurfing as a category was invented by lead users. US fiberglass surfboards were invented after World War II by lead users of wooden surfboards. Plumbers, lead users among plumbers would make their own tools, which became standardized, and now they're sold as manufactured tools by big tool makers, but they were created by users. And you see this with web standards. You see a lot of innovative web developers who are the most well-paid. Some of them are independent, some of them are at big companies, and they innovate, they create things. So what we want to do is get the lead users. What Taleb calls the intransigent minorities, the people who will say, I'm going to use Brave, even though I get chided for ad blocking. I go to a publisher and it says, you're using an ad blocker. You must go away or pay us or turn off your ad blocker. Those are valuable users. They can move markets. Firefox never got more than 27% of the desktop market in 2011 after Chrome. And then it started succumbing to the great marketing power of Google and the arguably better browser. But Firefox punched way above its weight in the standards bodies. Even in 2004, when we were just starting, and Microsoft wasn't able to wake up and turn Internet Explorer back on. It took them 5 years to do that. Chrome was 4 years away from 2004. We started HTML5. We started the JavaScript standards. So having a stubborn minority that's a high-value user cohort, the lead users, allows you to use a lot of leverage soundly and move the world to a better place. So, Brave doesn't need to be a monopoly. We don't want to. We'll bring the BAT to other apps. We'll standardize. If we ever got 100% of the market, we would demand a recount. We'd rather just have 27% and stable. I think if Firefox had its own BAT-like funding mechanism, it wouldn't have fallen to Chrome so fast. It would have been more independent. It would have been able to do things like block ads to shore up its market share. Even now, I think Mozilla is struggling to turn on tracking protection. They hired somebody good out of Princeton. He's, I think, part of the reason they're now talking about tracking protection by default. I think it's in Firefox Nightly. I'm not sure how well it works. And I hope they don't sort of compromise it. But it's hard for a bigger share browser to do those things. That's the other side of being a startup and using the ultimate lead users, the most valuable users. If you're Firefox and you go to block third-party cookies, the whole internet intermediary space, the Interactive Advertising Bureau, the IAB, starts screeching at you, taking off full-page ads. This happened in 2013. It was like the third time Mozilla had flirted with blocking third-party cookies, same way Safari does, which has a big loophole, by the way, and that's been improved by Apple. But at that time, we didn't even know what was happening in Firefox. It was being put in through the open source as a patch to block third-party cookies, just like Safari. Oh, and by the way, it's on by default. And by the time we realized it, Randall Rothenberg of the IAB was screaming at us. Mozilla's un-American. They hate small business. They're trying to kill mom and pop stores. And so you get this incredible heat if you're of size. And that's why I think even Apple, though it blocks third-party cookies and it's blocking some kinds of tracking, hasn't quite come around to ad blocking by default. But it could happen. Mozilla is kind of, people I know at Mozilla are kind of talking about it. I think we're helping them get there. Now, if you block ads overnight and a bunch of the internet funding collapses and it's a disaster, and there's going to be not just screeching, but real hardship for even the publishers who get 20% of the revenue are barely getting by. So we don't want to do anything catastrophic. That's the other advantage of working through a startup and getting lead users, so we can move the big ship gradually to a better orientation. So I'm sorry it takes time, but it has to, because it involves building consensus and standards bodies. It involves not throwing everybody into an economic panic. It involves proving a better model for funding. And I think it'll work. I think it's working already. What we've got so far is I think, already convincing proof of that. Anybody else?
So Brave is one of the only ones that lets me pick where my money's going. Recently there's been campaigns for choosing how you spend your money. Would there be an option to be maybe some fraction
The easiest way to do it is to go to whatever, say it's a Sierra or some other like wildlife fund. Just go there and put 100% or 50% of your monthly budget there. So we don't want to be deciding where you do it. You can do it, and you can send as much as you want. That reminds me of something else we want to do. As we build up the ad system, we'll want to have high-quality ads from reputable brands. We'll want to have nobody trolling us, as happened on Twitter when we've sent swastikas to people. We'll want to probably have very clean charities that don't have any black marks against them, like health charities, spinal research charities, for house ads. And if those house ads perform, they load in a tab, they become candidates. So you can see I loaded, I'm not going to give them any, I should turn it off. So that cool motorcycle ad for that place in Dublin, Elon Musk can go get those. I'm not going to get them, so I'm turning it off. Again, we lift the ad into a first-party context. If you convert on it, that's good. If you want to donate to it, you can too. So some of the house ads will be charities. You can donate that way.
Yeah, do you mind, or is this something that I can look up on my own, but just the experience from the advertiser's perspective, like what that looks like? I don't know if you could show me.
I don't have a dashboard that I can show you. We were meeting in London the other week. We had a view of it from the person building it. It's sort of like what goes with this slide. You'll want to be able to plan your campaign and look at segments. The segments have to be coarse enough they don't re-identify anybody. But if you're trying to buy ad space for selling cars, you'll want to know that there's a certain fraction of our Brave users who are opted in, who are car buyers or likely car buyers, auto intenders. This is a big advertising category. It's always used in all the demos. The stupid thing now is if you go to CarMax or another site right now, AutoTrader, you get cookied as an auto intender. And for the rest of the 30 days of your browsing, you see car ads, even though you're not really, you were just on a lark. So we'll hope to do better with the local machine learning on that front. But we have to be able to let advertisers see very coarse buckets of audience. And that's what this dashboard we're building does. And we'll have blog posts and screenshots of it as soon as it's further along. Pretty soon now. Thanks. Running out of steam here. Hope that helps. Spread the word. Oh, by the way, we have the new build that's based on more thoroughly on Chrome in the sense that we don't include Google accounts or sync code or their Gaia object that sends all these funny URLs. But does allow all the extensions you want, except the ones that require sync or accounts, Google accounts. So one of the friction points for people adopting Brave on the laptop or desktop has been we only support a handful of Chromium extensions like 1Password and Dashlane, LastPass, Pocket, Honey. There's a short list, but that was due to our front-end architecture based on Electron, or a fork of it called Muon, Heavy Electron, which we did to fix Electron security problems. And everything Electron did differently from Chrome in the front end meant extensions wouldn't work without some effort. Now we're based on a fork of the Chrome front end. It's all open source from chromium.org. Disabled all the calling Google for accounts and spying purposes, and support extensions that don't require those features. So any extension you want, and that's going to reduce the friction and help desktop adoption greatly, because that's the number one complaint I hear is people say, number one or two complaint is, I'd love to use Brave as my default, but I need these extensions. I use this, the Salesforce CRM extension. I use this other thing. And there's a long tail. Most of these are okay. They're not security or privacy malware. Now you can get them. And that's available from our site under brave.com/download-beta for the beta version. And there's a more rapidly changing cutting-edge download-dev. So try it out. If you're using desktop Brave or laptop Brave and you feel like it's not giving you the extensions you want, or its user interface is a little sluggish compared to Chrome, this should fix all that. Thanks. Thank you.